Hello there. In this video, I'll be talking about a very popular web framework, Django. Django is a Python-based web framework. So in this video, we'll look at Django's history and its design principles, and more importantly, how to install Django, and then we'll look at how to set up an initial project with Django. So with that initial project, beyond that you can of course learn more and build your web application on top of that. So this is just the first steps that usually involves in setting up an initial project. So let's get started. So when talking about the Django's history, and it was created by Adrian Holavati and Simon Willison in 2003, when they were working in another company. And Django is a Python-based web framework, obviously, and it was named after a Belgian French guitarist, namely Django Reinhardt. Now it powers popular websites and web applications, and you don't need any introduction to Instagram, Pinterest, and National Geography. So these are very popular websites and web applications that people use day to day, and these web applications are powered by the Django Python web framework. So there are many alternatives to Django as well. So web framework domain or web framework market is very crowded, and even within Python language itself there are many other alternatives available. For example, Flask is an alternative that people use to develop web applications instead of Django. Very popular framework, Flask, and it's more lightweight than Django in many terms, but Django has its own advantages and its own spirits and its sentiments when it comes to developing web applications. Tornado and CherryPy are two Python web applications, or Python web frameworks to develop web applications. Tornado is a very good web application or web framework rather to develop real-time web applications and so forth. And in other languages, if you look at Rails, is a web framework that if you're a Ruby developer, you can focus on Rails framework. Laravel is a PHP-based web framework. So there are many web frameworks like that. Node.js, of course, it brings JavaScript to the backend, and there are quite a lot of web applications being developed using Node.js as well. Apart from that, web applications and websites can still be developed using CMSs, content management systems like WordPress and Drupal. So those are PHP-based content management systems, but you can still very popular choices to develop your personal websites and blog sites and so forth. But still, if someone wants, they can still develop web applications using WordPress and Drupal as well. There are many more like this, and if you look at some other languages, you still find alternatives to Django in those languages as well. So this market is crowded, but Django has its own way of doing things. And Django's design principles include don't repeat yourself, meaning if you define something, you try to utilize that everywhere. For example, if you define a model of a particular object, you should not be repeating that in multiple places, such as in database queries, such as in your front end forms, such as in your maybe your controller logic, whatever it is. So you should not be repeating yourself, and that's one of the principles of Django. Don't repeat yourself, and also make different layers loosely coupled. Of course, a lot of MVC based architecture, model view controller based architectures, support this notion, but Django is very strict on that. You can really have your model completely separated, view and the controller completely separated as well. Sometimes Django framework is also called as architected using MTV architecture, model template view architecture. Whichever it is, it's more more of a loosely coupled architecture is what you have in Django. And also it is one of the other principles that Django follows is explicit is better than implicit notion. So this actually comes from Python itself. Python also has this notion of explicit is better than implicit, which means if you try to make something implicit, that code might be shorter. For example, you may be able to achieve certain logic in much shorter code because there are some implicit work happening. But when it comes to developers and newbies, for them to understand what's happening under the hood might be a difficult task when it comes to implicit operations, right? You need to know in and out of that particular framework or a library when there are implicit operations like that. So you should not assume anything like that. So in Python principle, Django also adopts the same principle of explicit is better than implicit. And of course, Django has batteries included, meaning you can do database operations without having much SQL level understanding. You can also plug in different other frameworks, authentication systems, and so forth. There are quite a lot of extensions available, and Python included. Python language itself has quite a lot of libraries, so you can use those libraries in Django. So that's why I call it batteries included. So that's a quite a good short introduction to Django. So let's dive into installing Django right away. So that's what the main target of this particular video. So of course, to have Django installed, you need to have Python installed because it's based on Python. And I'm not going to show you how to install Python because it's quite straightforward. If you go to python.org, you can download the Python version for your operating system, or sometimes if you're using a Linux based distribution, you might be able to install it using your package manager, or sometimes you might already have it even without doing anything. And pip is a Python package manager. Usually you do have a pip installed in latest versions of Python, and otherwise you can still get pip from this particular location, and then using Python, because it's a Python script file, you'll be able to install it as well. Virtual env, it's also optional, but we highly recommend you have that thing installed as well. So we'll dive into how to do that. And yeah, so let's dive in. So there are many different ways to install Django. So I'll talk about the most popular type. So this talks about first installing a virtual environment, assuming that you have pip installed. Okay, so let's see things. Python v. Python is already installed here, and let me see, or let me show you python.org. If you go there and if you click the downloads tab, you'll be able to download it for various platforms. So I'm on Mac, so you'll be able to download Python image file, and you can just double click and install it from there. And Mac also has a package manager called Brew. You should be able to install it using that as well. For example, something like Brew install Python. You can figure that out in your if you just do a quick search, you will be able to figure that out, right? So that's about Python. So I have Python installed already. So pip, you can either check if pip is installed here. Pip is indeed installed in my machine. Otherwise you can get pip from the location I mentioned here and then execute it, and you'll be able to get pip installed. So now it's pip install virtually env. I believe I should have it. Let me show that as well. Otherwise, virtual env, and yeah, it's getting downloaded, and it should be done in about a minute or so. less than a minute. Yeah. So yeah, successfully installed virtual environment. So why do we need virtual environment is because we want to have different projects. Now you might have 2 or 3 Django projects coming up in future. So now what we can do is we can create a virtual environment. When you do that thing with as in the second command here, so when you do that thing, what happens is that it creates a copy of your Python 3, for example, as if you have installed it just now. So that virtual environment will be a clean slate Python installation, and on top of that, of course, you can do further installation of different packages such as Django or like libraries and so forth and whatnot. So those kind of things you can do, and that will help you create your projects on a clean slate every time. So let's say you have one Django project now, and next time you have another Django project, and you know that there is a latest version of Django is released. Maybe you can use that latest version in that project without affecting your previous project. So that's the advantage of having virtual environment. So I highly recommend that you use that as well. So let me just copy this and use it here. So wherever you are, it says unrecognized argument. Okay, so if you look at this error, I just did a quick test on that before I just came back to this video. But unrecognized argument, the reason is because you need to have a double slash here. So when I copy pasted that, it threw an error. So it just recognized that as a no weird character. So make sure that you have this double dash properly, and then once you do that thing, you should have this directory created. And if you just go into that, you will have a bin directory, a lib directory. It's just like a Python lib and Python bin directory. If you just look into peep into that, you will see a bunch of executables and scripts available, like as you can see Python script, Python executable, and pip executable, and also an executable name activate. And if you look at the lib, you will be able to see the Python 3.9 there, and underneath that site packages. Of course, this is where your packages, Python packages, will be installed when you do installation on top of this. Thing that I want to do is activate your virtual environment with this. So as you can see, it's a source bin activate. So I can just do that here. I can say source bin activate. So when you do that thing, note that your prompt changed with the name of your virtual environment. And so with this, now on top of this, I'm going to install Django. So you can specify which version of Django that you want to install. Otherwise, you can leave it just as this. It will just download the latest version of Django. So if I just go here and take you to the Django project.com, and you'll be able to see a lot of information in this website. And if you go to downloads, as you can see, the latest version is 4.01, and you can do this installation, but I think even if you skip that, it will just download the latest version. And you have plethora of information here about the releases and the support period and so forth, and its documentation is very verbose and very concise in certain sections, and I found it really useful. So I recommend you to if you're developing a Django web application, you should have this website documentation bookmarked, and you should refer it every now and then. Okay, so let's get Django installed. So let's see what happens. As you can see, it just downloads the 4.01 as expected. It should take a few seconds to finish. And so this is installing Django. So once this is done, we are all set to start our sample project. So next thing that I want to do is so there are other ways to install Django as well, not just using pip. And if you happen to download the targz file from the downloads section, you can just give that path to pip and it will do the needful to do the installation. Or else you can even get the Django uh, clone, or you can just copy this thing and then just use it in the pip command itself. And note that there is a git plus here, and then after that you have to just paste the https command. So I'm gonna go to the next section. And so there are a few other commands that I want to run and then wrap up this video, because this is what I wanted to quickly show you, how to set up a Django project sooner. So with Django, you would also get this Django admin executable, which helps you to start your project, and it will just create a very concise folder with all the required files within it, and it makes you just jump start on a project quite easy. So Django admin start project, whatever the project name. So let me use that. So Django admin start project, my test web project. So give a meaningful name to your project. So because I'm creating it just a test project, you can just go into that. So once you go in, you will see two things. You see a manage.py file, and there is underneath that there is another folder called my test web project. And if you just go into my test web project, you see a couple of files here. You see a settings file, and it just does what it says. It's a settings file with different settings. And there is a urls.py file where you just put all your URL templates of your web application while you develop. There's a WSGI file, WSGI file, that is quite important to do your deployments and so forth. So we'll come to those kind of details in a later video. Init.py is not a Django specific file, but it's a Python file where that's what gets initiated initially when Django starts up. Yeah, so that's one. So now our project boilerplate project setup is all fine. So now we have to go to the next section here. Python manage.py run server. Simple. So this will I'm getting, yeah, so that's because I'm inside. I'm not looking at the manage.py. And if I do this, as you can see, it just gives me a URL which I can copy paste and open it in my browser. So but also it gives me a warning, just bear with me. We have to run this python manage.py migrate to apply certain changes. For example, when this boilerplate structure was created, there were few models like authentication models, content type models, and sessions. So these needs to be applied into a database, which we haven't done yet, because Python Django by default brings in SQLite, but when you do this python manage.py migrate, it will apply those model types to equivalent SQLs and create tables and other structures in the SQLite database. Otherwise, if you want to use some other database like MySQL, PostgreSQL, or Oracle, you can do such configurations in the settings.py file which I mentioned earlier, and then run python manage.py migrate with, of course, with necessary credentials being set up in the settings.py file, it will create the necessary um, tables and structures in the database. Okay, let's open up the browser and then use our URL, and voila, so the install worked successfully, and congratulations. If you see this thing, we have done everything right. And so yeah, so that's all that we got on starting off a project, but there are little more things that you can do. Yeah, so as I said, you can use this Python migrate command. So I recommend, when you develop, of course, you can do. So if you just do this thing, you have this db.sqlite, but you don't have anything in that. But if you just run this thing, it will start creating all those SQLs within it. And if you just open SQLite now, you will be able to see all those tables being created as well. So also, let's try to quickly look into the settings.py file. So you see installed apps here, and so you can create multiple apps within a project, and when you have multiple such apps, you have to add those applications here. And database, if you look at the default one, is the backends.sqlite 3. Otherwise you can specify backends.mysql, Oracle, PostgreSQL, and so forth. The name says the base directory, and this is the name that you see in our base directory db.sqlite 3. If you wanted to change that thing, you could have changed that. And if your engine is a different engine like MySQL or Postgres or Oracle, there are many other parameters that you can look into to configure your username, passwords, and so forth, and many other parameters related to database configuration. So you can look into the Django documentation to learn more about that. Let's now quickly add a new URL pattern and then a very home page to our application to see how it reacts to that. So I would open this in code. I already got that thing open, so let me just try to open it here. So as you can see, my test web project, so URLs, settings.py, and so forth. I'll keep that thing open as well. So the one that I'm now interested is urls.py. So I'm gonna add this particular line, django.views.generate.template view, and add a new path which is an empty path targeting the home page. Template name, I'm gonna say home.html, and this line. So the previous versions, there used to be something called URL. It's deprecated now in the latest version. So in that version, you could have added a regular expression here to match your URL pattern as well. So but the latest version now supports the newer method called path, and I recommend you use that. For further details, you can refer to the documentation of the Django website. Okay, so with this thing, let me run Python manage server, and yeah, it's running now. So let's start with this copying, and if you run this, and now it says template does not exist. And of course, right, so this is expected because we created a new template, but that template doesn't exist. So we have to create this home.html file somewhere. So let's for the time being create it here. home.html, right? And of course that is an HTML, so you can add any HTML logic or tags. So let me do that thing quite soon, with a body tag, and maybe say h1, saying welcome to Django. Okay, let's keep this thing as this. Now I would like to shift your attention to settings.py file once again. As you can see, templates. There is a section called templates. So in this you find a directory called a section called dir. So in this dir section we need to add the directories relevant to um, whatever the directories that we are planning to have as templates. So you can add the templates directory here. So in this directories location, you can add this particular name itself, like my test web project, and then I'm going to add something called templates. So there should be a directory underneath this called templates, and that's where it will expect my files to be. So I'm going to move that there. So now it's within that, and now let's go to our application and refresh it, and voila, yes, we get welcome to Django. And yeah, so pretty much that's it. But I would like to finish off with quickly showing you the admin uh, section as well, admin portal. So now as you can see, the admin thing is already there. It's configured. Admin.site.urls is already configured. So now we need to have, let's say, in let's try to use admin here. And of course you see this, and you don't have any username and password here that I need to create. So I can try adding some dummy ones. Of course I won't be able to log in. So to do that thing, I need to start my server once again, and then use this command that you have here, Python manage.py create super user, and username you can say admin, for example, email address admin at testwebproject.com. Password is also, I'm just gonna use admin for the time being. So bypass the password validation. It does a validation, but it's just for the testing purpose. Like, I'm gonna say yes. So now let's run our server once again, and then let's refresh this, and obviously this time it just lets you in because I just used the same password, username and password there. So users, you should be able to see the created user here, and so this gives you a very good head start. And when you have more models created in your Django web application, those models you'll be able to see here, and you can do CRUD operations, and this is quite handy to have such a admin portal enabled by default and given by Django, and that helps a lot. Okay, so that brings me to the end of my session for today, and thank you very much for listening in, and hope you enjoyed this session and found something useful. Please subscribe to my channel here, and I will see you in more videos in future. Thank you very much.